The relationship what I believed. The years that followed were not cold. That is what I want you to understand. Crown Prince Ren was not cruel. He was not unkind. He would visit me in the evenings, and we would share tea. And he would ask about my embroidery or my reading. Sometimes he would tell me about matters of state. I listened to every word. I learned the names of every minister, every general, every province that kept him awake at night. I kept those names stored in my heart like a private library. Because I thought one day, when I am beside him as his consort, I will be useful to him. I will be more than decoration. We were not in love, but we were building something, or so I believed. I believed that for 4 years. For years of careful words. 4 years of patience. For years of becoming the woman I thought he needed. And then one evening, he did not come for tea. He did not come the next evening either, or the one after that. The rumors reached me before any official word did. Her name was Zhu. She was a courtesan from the southern pleasure quarters. The court whispered that she had a voice like running water and a laugh that could make a man forget his name. I heard these things from my handmaid, who whispered them with her eyes low and her hands folded, because she did not know how to tell me kindly what could not be said kindly. I remember standing very still when she finished speaking. I remember looking at my hands, and I thought I have spent 4 years becoming someone, and none of it mattered. The formal dismissal came 3 weeks later. A palace official read the decree in my receiving room. 12 people standing, 12 people watching my face. The words he read were gentle, diplomatic, wrapped in the language of incompatibility and the needs of the dynasty. But what the words meant was simpler. You are not wanted. Someone else has been chosen. Go home. That one decree, it felt like someone took the ground from under my feet. I did not cry in that room. I thanked the official. I bowed. I walked back to my inner chamber and sat down on the floor because my legs could no longer hold the weight of what I was pretending not to feel. My father received me back at home in silence. My mother wept once, in the kitchen, where she thought I could not hear her, and I understood what I had become in the eyes of the world. A returned woman. That word hung over our house for weeks. Neighbors who had once sent gifts no longer sent greetings. Invitations stopped arriving. My younger sister, who was to be engaged the following spring, had her prospects quietly reconsidered by the other family. I had not just lost a future. I had taken pieces of theirs with me. I did not leave the house for 40 days. On the 41st day, my father called me into his study. He looked older than I had ever seen him. Like those 40 days had added 10 years to his face. He said, very quietly, "An audience has been requested. The emperor wishes to speak with you." I looked at him for a long moment. The emperor? Not the crown prince. Not a minister. Not someone offering charity. The emperor himself. The king, the unexpected encounter? I will not pretend I was not afraid. I had met Emperor Zhao only once before, at a formal court ceremony. He had been distant, formal, unreachable, the way emperors are designed to be. He was 51 years old, a widower for 7 years, a man the court described as serious, restrained, unmoved by sentiment. When I entered the private audience hall, there were no officials present, only him. He was standing near the window, looking at the courtyard below. He turned when I entered, and I bowed deeply. And he said something I did not expect. He said, "Do not bow. Come and sit." I sat. He sat across from me, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I owe you an apology. What was done to you was not handled with the dignity you deserved. That was all. No explanation. No political reasoning. No softening. Just I owe you an apology." I had not been spoken to like that in 40 days. I had not been spoken to like that, perhaps, in years. I felt something crack open in my chest. Not pain. Something quieter than pain. Recognition. The love that grew slowly. He began to send books. That was how it started. A messenger would arrive at our home every few weeks, carrying a small lacquered box, inside a scroll, or a bound volume of poetry, sometimes with a single sentence written in the margin in his own hand. I thought of this passage when I heard you had studied Confucian texts. This poem is one I have returned to in difficult years. Do you agree with the author's conclusion? I find myself uncertain. I wrote back, carefully at first, formally the way a minister's daughter addresses an emperor, and then one afternoon, without quite meaning to, I wrote something honest. I wrote, I do not agree with the author's conclusion. I think he is afraid of his own longing and has dressed that fear in the language of philosophy. I stared at what I had written for a long time. I nearly burned it. I sent it. 3 days later, his reply came. One line. I have never had anyone say that to me before. Please do not stop. Years passed like that. Letters. Then visits. Then conversations that stretched past the candles burning low. I learned who he was, not the emperor. The man behind the title. A man who had loved his late wife fiercely and quietly. A man who carried his grief like a stone in his pocket. Always present, never displayed. And he learned who I was. Not a returned woman. Not a discarded consort. Me, Lian. The woman who argued with dead philosophers in the margins of borrowed books. The woman who had spent 4 years learning to be invisible and had forgotten. She had a voice. He did not ask me to be anything I was not. He did not ask me to be anything at all. He simply stayed. And one evening, in a garden not unlike this one, he asked me to be his empress. Not his consort. Not a secondary wife. His empress. I looked at him for a very long time. And I said, you should know that I do not love ease. That I have learned to be careful with what I give. He said, I know. That is why I am asking you. And not someone easier to love. That was it. And somehow, that moment stayed with me longer than any grand declaration ever could have. The resolution, looking back. I became empress at 26 years old. Crown Prince Ren, I will not speak of him with bitterness. The courtesan Zhu became his consort. The court whispered that he was not happy. That she was beautiful, but restless. I do not know if that is true. What I know is this. When I sat beside Emperor Xiao in the Great Hall, when I wore the Empress's seal and he reached, without ceremony, without anyone watching, and placed his hand briefly over mine, I thought of my mother's prayer. Your purpose? Your worth? She had meant it as a ceiling. It turned out to be a floor. The starting point of a life I had not been given permission to imagine. Philosophical close. People say that rejection is an ending, but that's not true. Some rejections are simply the wrong door closing so the right one can open. I was not chosen by the young prince who wanted something bright and easy. I was chosen by a man who had lived long enough to know that what he needed was someone real, and I was real. That was the thing no one saw until he did. I don't open my memories often, because every time I do, I don't just remember the past. I go back and live it again. The letters, the books, the one line that changed everything. Please do not stop. I never did, and neither did he. If this story reached something in your heart today, something quiet, something you have been carrying, then you are exactly who I made this for. Leave a word in the comments. Just one word of how you are feeling right now. And if you are new here, welcome. This channel is a place where silence speaks, and hearts remember what time could never erase. I will see you in the next story. I was not chosen once, and then I was chosen in a way I never expected. People say humiliation is the worst thing a woman can survive, but that's not true. What I survived, what broke me and then quietly rebuilt me was not the humiliation itself. It was the silence that followed. And then, something I never asked for. Something I never planned. A love that should have been impossible. My name is Lian. I am 72 years old. And I am sitting here in my garden, watching the last of the winter plum blossoms fall. And I am thinking about a word I have never spoken out loud to anyone. Chosen. I need to take you back. Back to when I was 17 years old. To the imperial court of a world that no longer exists the way I remember it. My father was a minister of the 3rd rank. Not the highest. Not low either. We lived well. We dressed with care. We spoke with measured words. And from the time I could remember, my mother had told me one thing, quietly, like a prayer she said every morning. You will be the crown prince's consort, Lian. That is your purpose. That is your worth. I believed her. Not because I wanted to, but because I had never been given the space to want anything else. When I was 19, the betrothal was formalized. Red paper. Gold seals. Gifts carried in lacquered boxes across our courtyard. I stood in silk robes. I had practiced standing in for weeks so I would not tremble. I did not tremble. I remember looking at Crown Prince Ren from across the hall. He was 23. Tall. Composed. He looked at me the way you look at a piece of calligraphy someone has handed you, admiring the brushwork, but not yet reading the words. And I thought to myself, this is enough. This is a good life. That might sound small to you, but for me, in that time, in that world, it was everything.